In this movie, we're going to talk about snapping. There's a couple different ways that Revit allows us to snap. What snap means is basically a predefined level of precision that Revit can automatically associate geometry to. So we have a few different ways to snap. We have linear snaps, where Revit will automatically associate the length of geometry to length increments that we designate. We have angular snapping, where it will snap to increments along a compass angle, so many degrees. And we have object snapping, where we can actually snap to key geometric points on existing objects with other objects. So let's take a look at a few examples. I'm working in the adding walls file, which you may already have open from a previous lesson. If you have some geometry in your version of the file, just go ahead and delete it. We don't really need the temporary walls that we did in the previous movie. We just want to start with a clean file here. Be careful not to delete these elevation markers. Okay, so if you make a selection, just make sure that if you are unsure that you click the filter tool and you select only walls. Okay, we want to make sure that's all we're deleting. Okay, so let's take a look at snapping. First thing we ought to do is look at the Manage tab and the Snaps dialog. So I'm going to click that tool on the Manage tab, and let me just show you what we're going to be working with. We'll start with length dimension snap increments. These are user-definable settings, and they are project-wide. The default behavior is to snap first to a 4-foot increment, then to jump down to a 6-inch increment, then finally 1 inch and 1/4 inch. Now, it's easiest to explain what that means by just showing you. So let's go ahead to the Home tab. We're going to click the Wall tool. For this example, it doesn't matter what settings we use in the Wall tool, so I'm just going to leave all the defaults. It's a line. I don't care about the height or the location line or any of the other settings. I'm just going to click any point on screen and start moving my mouse. Now notice the dimension that appears, and more importantly, notice the increment in which the dimension is snapping to. You'll notice that it's snapping in a 4-foot multiple. So if I were to click my mouse right now, I'm guaranteed that that wall is exactly 36 feet long. If I were to go in this other direction, I'm guaranteed that it's now 48 feet long. So that is the snapping behavior in action. It doesn't matter where we started drawing the wall from, but relative to that first point, the length of that wall is exact. We can even do it along an angle here. So notice that the angle is 25 degrees, but the length of this wall is exactly 48 feet. So I'm going to undo a couple of those walls and start again. I just did Control-Z to do that undoing. And this time, I'm going to click my first point. And before I click my second point, I'm going to roll my wheel mouse in a little bit, and that will zoom me in a little bit closer. And now you'll notice that the snap increment has suddenly gotten finer. We're now snapping to the nearest 6 inches as opposed to the nearest 4 feet. So it's as precise as the other one. It's just using a more intricate increment than it was a moment ago. If I roll my wheel in further still, and then begin to move my mouse again, you'll see that at some level of zoom, it will begin snapping now to the 1 inch increment. So now I'm getting 5 inches and 3 inches. It's no longer just every 6 inches. And so again, 2'7", that's an exact number. I can count on that number being as accurate as I need it to be. It's just within a 1 inch tolerance. And then finally, if I zoom in further still, and I might need to get a little closer to my endpoint here. There it goes right there. You can see that now we're snapping to the nearest 1/4 inch. So this is a really handy feature that we have built into Revit, and it's with us all the time. Now I'm doing it in the context of walls, but if we were drawing lines or if we were sketching floors or whatever other tool we were using, that method would still work. Now I'm going to type ZF, which is the shortcut for zoom to fit, and that's going to back me out. And I'm going to delete those objects. And let's say that I wanted a different increment. Perhaps I don't want to go from 4 feet all the way to 6 inches. Maybe I want to go 2 feet in between that. All I have to do is come in here and type in 2 feet and separate it by a semicolon. And when I click OK, Revit will now jump from 4-foot increments to 2-foot increments. Actually, I got to be back out here. There's 4-foot increments. Zoom in. There's my 2-foot. Okay, and then if I keep zooming in, I'm at 6 inches and then 1 inch and so forth and so on. So you can customize the increment that's being used to suit your needs, and you can do that on the fly. I mean, it's not a one-time thing. Anytime you need to change the increment, you can come in here and change it. Now the same applies for angles. You can see that there the increment goes from 90 degrees to 45 to 15 all the way down to 1. So the same behavior applies there. And then here's object snaps. So I want to just talk about this a little bit. If you've used other CAD software, this concept is familiar to you, but if you're totally new to computer-aided design software, then this concept will be new. What this allows you to do is actually snap geometry to key geometric points on other geometry. So in the case of where I have a wall here, that wall has an endpoint at this end, an endpoint at this end, and a midpoint right here. If I were coming in and drawing another wall, Revit will either snap to the endpoint, and it will indicate that by a little square, or the other endpoint over here, or the midpoint, which it will indicate by a little triangle. Now, in both cases, a tooltip usually appears on screen to indicate that, and we can always override the behavior we're getting by using a keyboard shortcut. So in the dialog that we were just in, all the keyboard shortcuts were listed, and the one for midpoint, for example, was SM for snap to midpoint. So if I type the letters SM, you'll notice that it will ignore all the other potential snaps, and wherever my mouse is along the wall, it will be looking for midpoints, and then when I click, it will snap to the midpoint. As soon as you click, it goes back to the default. So I do highly encourage you to open up the Snap dialog and pay attention to each of these hotkeys and memorize them, I guess, if you will, so that they become easy for you to use. So in summary, there's a few different ways that we can snap to things in Revit. This behavior works across the program. I've demonstrated it here in the context of walls, but it can be used for any kind of geometry. But you have your length snaps, which snap to certain length increments depending on your zoom level, your angular snaps, and your object snaps, which snap to key geometric points along the geometry.